Montana Territory, October 1879. The wind cut cold through the Blacktail Valley, sharp with the promise of snow, when Weston Tate found a stranger asleep in his barn. He had gone out before dawn, lantern in hand, to check on a calving mare. The barn was quiet, save for the soft rustle of hay and the shifting of horses. Then he saw the shape curled against the far wall, half hidden behind a stack of feed sacks. Weston stepped closer, boots crunching on the dirt floor. The figure stirred, flinching back with a hiss of pain. "Easy," he said, holding the lantern up. It was a woman. Barely more than a shadow at first, then clearer under the flickering light. Her dark hair was matted with leaves and blood, her cheeks split purple-blue, and her dress torn at the hem. She looked young but not a girl, maybe 20. Maybe older. Her arms hugged her ribs like she was holding herself together. "I ain't here to hurt you," Weston said gently, setting the lantern down. He took off his coat without thinking and draped it over her shoulders. "You are freezing." She stared at him, eyes wide and wild. "I will leave." I just needed a place to stop." "You are not going anywhere like that," he said. "You are hurt bad, let me help." She looked like she might bolt, but her body betrayed her. She sagged back against the wall, breathing hard. "My name is Weston," he said. "Weston Tate, you are on my land." "You are safe now," she blinked, then swallowed hard. "Sahra," she whispered. "Sahra Coyle." Weston nodded once. "All right, Sahra, let's get you inside." She tried to stand and staggered. He caught her before she hit the ground. She flinched again, but he just steadied her, wrapping his arm around her waist and letting her lean on him. She did not weigh much. He took her through the back door of the house so his ranch hand, Greg, would not startle her. Inside was warmer. He led her to the chair by the stove, then ducked into the kitchen to fetch a basin of water and the jar of lard salve his mother had made before she passed. Sahra did not speak much. She winced when he cleaned her cuts and pressed the salve into the bruises rising along her jaw and ribs. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" he asked. She looked away. "I was traveling west with a man. He turned on me." Weston felt his jaw tighten. He did not ask more. She was here now. That was enough. He gave her a blanket and let her rest in the spare room. She drifted into sleep fast, exhaustion winning over fear. By morning, snow had dusted the hills. Weston checked on her before heading out to tend the livestock. She was still asleep, curled under the quilt. She stayed for 3 days. Quiet, careful, always watching. Weston gave her space, but he noticed things: how she folded the laundry without being asked, how she kept her hands busy peeling potatoes or sweeping the porch. She was not idle. She was trying to earn her keep. On the 4th evening, Weston came in to find her at the stove, stirring stew. "You should be resting," he said. "I feel better when I work," she said softly. He nodded. "All right then." They ate in silence. Afterward, she stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself, looking out over the darkening hills. He joined her, handing her a mug of coffee. She took it with both hands. "I do not have anywhere to go," she said after a long time. "You are welcome to stay," he said. "I have room and work if you want it." She looked at him. "Why are you being kind?" Weston shrugged. "Because you needed help." "That is enough for me." Her eyes shone in the lantern light. "Most men are not like that. I ain't most men." A week passed. Then, too, the bruises faded. Sahra began to smile, small and soft. She braided her hair in the mornings and helped mend the old fence line with Weston in the afternoons. He started to look forward to hearing her laugh, rare and low, like the crackle of a warm fire. Then one night a stranger rode up the lane. Weston stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. Sahra froze when she saw the rider. His name was Merrick, the man she had escaped from. "You do not need to be here," Weston said coldly, standing between him and the door. "She is mine," Merrick growled. "She ran off with my things." "She is not yours," Weston said. "You can turn that horse around and keep riding." Merrick dismounted, hand on his belt knife. Sahra stepped out beside Weston then. Her voice was steady. "You will not touch me again." Merrick looked between them, then sneered. "You think he is going to protect you?" Weston did not say anything. He just raised the rifle a little higher. Merrick spat in the dirt and turned away. "She ain't worth the trouble." He rode off into the dark. Sahra slumped against the porch post, shaking. Weston set the rifle down and pulled her into his arms. She did not resist. "You are safe," he murmured. She buried her face in his chest. That night, she stayed by the fire long after he had gone to bed. He found her there in the morning, asleep in the rocker, his coat wrapped tight around her again. He stood there for a moment, watching her breathe. He had not expected to find anything like this. Not here, not now. But watching her sleep, he felt it settle in his chest like something permanent. She was not just passing through. She was home, and maybe, just maybe, so was he. The cows had broken the far fence again. Weston found the torn wire just past the cottonwoods, where the slope dipped and the snow held shallow. He crouched to study the tracks, hoofprints scattered wide, no wolf sign. Just restless cattle and thin boards never meant to hold through winter. He rode back slow, reins loose, letting the gelding pick its way through the frost-bitten grass. Smoke curled from the chimney when he reached the house. Inside, Sahra stood at the table, sleeves rolled to her elbows, scraping tallow into a candle mold. Her hands moved with quiet focus, the kind that came from knowing the shape of a task without needing to rush it. He leaned his shoulder against the doorframe. "You ever done fence work?" She turned. "Not with wire. You'll learn." "I'd like to." She wiped her fingers on a bit of muslin. "You need a second pair of hands, tomorrow. Snow'll hold off a day or two," Sahra nodded. "Then I'll be ready." Weston watched her for a moment. The quiet between them wasn't empty, it held weight, like earth packed firm. He shifted. "I've got a neighbor down valley, Mrs. Kinley. Keeps chickens and gossip both. She's been askin' after the woman stayin' here." "Is it a problem?" She didn't flinch, but her jaw set like stone. "No," he said. "Only she'll ride up the minute the snow clears, and she won't leave till she's satisfied you aren't my long-lost cousin or some outlaw in skirts." Sahra's mouth twitched. "What should I tell her?" "The truth, if you're ready for it." She dipped the wick into the cooling wax and let it settle. "I was born in Franklin County, Missouri. My father was a blacksmith, but he drank what he earned. My mother passed when I was 12. I left at 16 with a man who promised land in Oregon. We never made it past the Nebraska line." Weston didn't speak. He knew that kind of promise. "He sold off the wagon team in Julesburg for poker debts. After that, I walked." Her voice didn't tremble, but her hands, resting now on the table's edge, were white-knuckled. "I'll tell your neighbor I'm recovering from poor judgment." That ought to suit her. He stepped inside and took one of the molded candles from the sill. "You've got a steady hand. These'll burn clean. Making things helps." She looked up at him, eyes steady. "I don't aim to be a burden." "You're not." She didn't answer, but her shoulders eased. Later, as dusk settled and the wind picked up from the west, Weston lit one of her candles and set it in the window. The flame flickered, throwing soft gold across the room. Sahra moved about the hearth, stirring the pot with an easy rhythm. "Over supper," she asked. "Did you ever leave Montana?" He shook his head. "My father brought us here from Missouri when I was a boy. Never felt the pull to leave. Dirt's hard, but it's honest. I know where I stand in it." She swirled her spoon. "I've never had a place I wanted to stay." "You think that's changed?" She looked at him then, long and sure. "I think I'm not looking over my shoulder anymore." After the dishes were dried and stacked, she folded the dishcloth and stood by the fire with her arms crossed. "Weston?" Her voice was quiet but not uncertain. "That night you carried me in from the barn, I wasn't sure I'd ever be warm again." He looked up from stoking the fire, met her eyes. "I am now," she said. He rose slow, knee bones creaking with the cold. "I'm glad." The wind outside knocked softly at the window panes. She reached out, fingers brushing his. "I don't know what comes next." "Well," he said, "we've got fence to mend, chickens to steal from Mrs. Kinley, and a calf due before month's end." Her lips curved. "That's a start." He took her hand proper then. Calloused met calloused, and neither let go. By November's second week, the ground had hardened under a crust of ice. The mornings came brittle, frost clinging to the porch rail and the lower fence posts like pale moss. Weston rose early as always, and by the time he stepped into the kitchen, Sahra had already banked the hearth and laid out a pan of cornbread to cool. He paused, watching her arrange a sprig of dried chamomile on the windowsill. "You always up before the sun?" he asked. She turned, brushing her fingers on her skirt. "Only when I've dreamt too much." He nodded once, not pressing. She handed him a tin cup of chicory brew, still steaming. "There's a ledger in the back room," she said, settling across from him at the table. "I saw it yesterday while I was dusting." "You keep records for the cattle, every head, every sale. My father started it, I just kept on." "I used to help tally shop accounts in Missouri," she said. "The man who ran the general store couldn't read numbers proper, so I'd sit in the back and sort receipts." Weston glanced toward the hallway. "You want to take it on, if you trust me with it." "I do." She didn't answer, but her hand brushed his knuckles when she reached for the cornbread, and the touch lingered longer than it needed to. They spent the afternoon stretching new wire through the southern pasture. Weston showed her how to anchor the posts with a maul and brace the corners with cedar rails. She picked up the rhythm fast, wrist strong and deliberate, not wasting motion. "Never thought I'd be grateful for my father's forge," she said, tying off the last length with wire pliers. "But this feels near enough to smithing, just quieter." He passed her the last stake, his fingers grazing the inside of her palm. "Quieter's not bad." As they packed up the tools, a rider crested the ridge old man Kinley, with his saddlebag slung heavy and his hat tugged low. He tipped his head as he approached. "Weston, Miss." Sahra nodded, silent but steady. Kinley eased down from the saddle. "Was up checking my North Creek. Coyotes took 2 hens and left feathers like a warning. Figured I'd drop off the seed sack your hand asked for." Weston took the bundle. "Appreciate it." Kinley's gaze flicked to Sahra, then back. "Word's going round there's a woman keeping your house." "She is," Weston said. Kinley scratched his chin. "Folks'll talk." "Let him." The older man studied him a moment, then gave a short grunt and mounted back up. "Well, see you at the stock meet if the creek don't rise." They watched him ride off, hooves muffled in the snow crust. Sahra exhaled, voice low. "You didn't know him that?" "I didn't do it for him." She looked at him then, eyes dark and still behind the soft scatter of wind-blown hair. "You're not afraid of what people say?" "I've lived alone long enough not to care much. I used to bend myself into knots just to keep from being noticed." He didn't speak, just waited. She took a breath. "I don't want to be invisible anymore." That night after supper, she brought the ledger to the table. A kerosene lamp burned low beside her, casting long lines across her face as she flipped through the yellowed pages. "You've got 3 calves unbranded," she said, fingers sliding down the ink. "I know, I was waiting until spring." "Spring's a long time off." He leaned back in his chair, watching her. "You planning on staying that long?" She didn't look up. "I was hoping to." He reached across the table and laid his hand over hers. "Then I'll brand them early." She smiled, then not a shy, uncertain curve, but something full and quiet, like the way light breaks through thick cloud after days of gray. They sat like that for a while, the only sound the soft hiss of the lamp wick and the wind whispering through the eaves. Later, as Weston stepped outside to check the barn door latch, he looked back through the window. Sahra sat at the table still, head bent over the ledger, hair falling forward like a veil. The light framed her in gold. For the first time in years, the house looked lived in. He pulled the door shut against the wind, and something in his chest settled, not sudden but sure. Like a fence post driven deep and true, by mid-November the cold settled deep. The soil no longer gave under boots, and the trees on the ridgeline had dropped the last of their leaves, bearing their limbs like bones against the sky. Weston had brought the cattle in close to the lower pasture, where the wind didn't bite so hard, and spent most of his daylight checking feed and watching for signs of sickness. Sahra had taken to mending harness leather at the kitchen table. Her stitches were tight and even, waxed thread pulled snug through worn straps. She didn't hum or chatter, just worked with the same quiet diligence Weston had come to read as steadiness. One morning, as she sat by the window, She glanced up from the bridle in her lap. "I haven't worn a dress that wasn't torn or patched in 4 years." He looked up from the pot he was scrubbing near the hearth. "You want one? I want to feel like I belong in it, not like I'm pretending." He wiped his hands on a rag and crossed the room slow. "You'd look just the same to me." "Dress or no?" Her eyes met his, searching. "I've been passed from man to man since I was 16. I don't want to be someone's obligation again." "You're not," Weston said. "Your choice." She held his gaze, then nodded once and bent back over the bridle. That afternoon, while she rode out with him to check the stream troughs, snow started falling, not heavy, but steady enough to soften the edges of the hills. They rode side by side, the horses moving slow through the gathering white. "I used to think snow was a kind of silence," she said, lifting her chin to watch the flakes. "It is," Weston answered. "The sort that covers what don't need saying." She nodded, then tilted her head. "You ever think about having children?" He hesitated, then said, "I did, years back. Before Pa died, before I got used to the quiet. I think I'd like to raise something that don't flinch when I touch it," she said. "Something that knows what steady love feels like." He looked at her fully then, the snow catching in her hair. "You'd be good at that." They rode back slow, letting the cold do what it would. By the time they reached the barn, the horses were dusted white, their breath fogging in short bursts. Weston rubbed down the gelding while Sahra tended the smaller mare they'd broken together earlier that month. She moved careful but sure, hands practiced. Inside, she hung her coat near the stove and glanced at the firewood stacked in the corner. "You were low this morning," she said. "I hauled another load in from the shed." "You didn't have to. Didn't do it for thanks." He stepped closer. "You see this place as yours now?" She looked up at him, the firelight catching amber in her eyes. "I see you as mine. The rest follows." He reached for her, then not rushed, not eager, just certain. His hand curved around her jaw, rough thumb brushing the edge of her cheekbone where the last of the old bruises had long since faded. "Say it again," he said. Her voice was steady. "You're mine." He kissed her, slow and warm, like something meant to last. That night, they didn't sleep in separate rooms. Weston stoked the stove one more time, then led her by the hand to his bed. There was no ceremony to it, no fireworks or flood. Just warmth and breath, and the soft way her hand curled against his chest come morning. She woke first, her head on his shoulder, the blanket drawn up to her chin. She lay still, listening to the wind moving outside and the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. For the first time in years, she did not feel the need to run. When Weston stirred, she looked up at him. "I want to marry you," she said, plain as a sunrise. He didn't blink, didn't shift. "I was thinking I'd ask you today," he answered, her mouth curved, not with surprise, but something deeper, like coming home after a long stretch of wandering. They didn't rush it. They spent the next days preparing. Not with lace or ribbons, but with fence posts and saddle oil and a trip to Mrs. Kinley's for a pot of hot coffee and a borrowed dress. The old woman didn't ask questions, not after Weston introduced Sahra as his intended. She just squeezed Sahra's hand and said, "About time someone made that man smile right." They married 2 weeks later, quiet and simple. Weston wore his best shirt. Sahra wore the borrowed dress, now hemmed to fit her frame. The preacher came up from the valley, his hands red from the cold. Afterward, they stood on the porch while the sun fell behind the hills. The snow had stopped, and the sky burned orange and gold. Sahra leaned against Weston's side, her hand tucked into his. "You ever wonder how it all turned?" she asked. "I reckon you wandered into my barn and turned it just fine." She laughed, low and warm. "I think I did." They stayed like that until the light died and the cold crept back in. But inside the house, the fire waited and the bed was warm and the quiet between them was no longer empty. It was home. By late December, the valley was quieted under a smooth white hush. The snow had deepened, packing the world into stillness, and the sky hung low most days, pale and thick like milk. Weston had taken to splitting firewood in the barn in the early hours, the steady rhythm of axe and crack echoing through the boards. Inside, the hearth never cooled. and Sahra had begun stitching a heavy quilt from worn shirts and spare wool. They moved through the days with an ease that had grown between them without announcement, a kind of understanding that didn't need naming. When Weston came in from the cold, she handed him a mug without asking. When she stayed too long at the sewing table, he laid a shawl over her shoulders without a word. One morning she stood at the window, watching a pair of elk pick their way along the tree line. "I never saw them this close before," she said. "Back in Missouri, all I ever saw were buzzards and stray dogs." Weston set his gloves on the stove to dry. "Some winters they come down low, food's hard up high." She turned, folding her arms. "I've been thinking about writing to my sister. You said she married off before you left." "She did. Last I heard she had a boy, maybe 2 by now." "What would you say to her?" Sahra hesitated, then said, "That I'm alive, that I found a man who doesn't raise his hand or his voice, that I'll never set foot east of the Platte again." Weston nodded, leaning against the table. "If you want to send a letter, I'll ride it to the post when the snow lifts." "I'd like that." Then, quieter, "I don't know if she'll write back. You'll know you tried." She gave him a long look, then reached out and touched the side of his jaw with her fingertips. "You've got ice in your beard." He leaned into her touch. "You melt it fast enough." That afternoon, they took the sleigh down to the lower pasture to check on the heifers. Weston handled the reins, but Sahra knew how to read the team's rhythm now, and she called out when one of the lead horses faltered on a drift. When they reached the gate, she climbed down first, lifting the latch and letting Weston drive through. "Think we'll have a calf born early?" she asked, brushing snow from her skirt. He glanced toward the sheltering shed. "That red one's carrying low, could be any day," she smiled. "We ought to be ready then." As they rode back, the scent of wood smoke reached them before they saw the roofline. A flicker of warmth stirred in Weston's chest. The house didn't feel like a duty anymore. It felt like a life. That evening, while Weston worked by lantern light over the account book, Sahra pulled a small box from the cupboard. Inside was a folded ribbon, soft blue, and a narrow gold pin shaped like a swallow. "This was my mother's," she said, sitting beside him. "She wore it every Sunday until she took ill." Weston looked at the pin, then at her. "You kept it through all that?" "It was the only thing I didn't pawn." She laid it in his palm. "I want you to keep it." He closed his fingers around it, then opened them again and stood. Crossing the room, he reached for the drawer in the old pie safe and pulled out a ring. It was simple, thin silver, no stone but polished and warm from his hand. "I was going to wait until spring," he said, "but you don't wait on something that's already true." She didn't answer right away. She just looked at the ring, then up at him. "You're sure?" she asked. He nodded. "Every day since you stepped out of that barn and looked me square in the eye." She held out her hand, and he slid the ring onto her finger. Her breath caught just once, and then she smiled with her whole face, eyes bright and wet. They didn't speak more that night. They didn't need to. They lay down, wrapped in the quilt she hadn't finished, the seams still loose in places, Weston's hand resting over hers beneath the folds. The next morning, the first calf came. Sahra was the one who spotted the cow laboring near the shed, and she was the one who knelt in the straw, arms bare to the elbow, coaxing the slick red calf into the world. When it hit the ground breathing, she looked up at Weston, cheeks flushed, snow melting on her lashes. "That's life," she said, standing with straw clinging to her hem. "Right there." He wrapped his coat around her shoulders and kissed her temple. "You brought it here." By February, the days began to stretch a little longer. The sun rose sooner, and the snow crusted over with a silver sheen before softening by mid-afternoon. Weston built a new chicken coop beside the barn, and Sahra planted sprigs of mint and sage in boxes along the windowsill. One morning, she stood at the table, a folded letter in her hand. "She wrote back," she said, voice unreadable. Weston set down the pail he'd been carrying. "Your sister. She has 3 boys now. She said she never stopped wondering what became of me." He waited. "She wants to visit in the spring." He stepped closer. "How do you feel about that?" Sahra looked down at the letter, then out the window at the white hills beginning to soften with the promise of thaw. I think it's time she saw where I ended up. They spent the rest of the winter preparing. Weston added a bench to the front porch, and Sahra stitched curtains for the guest room. She wrote another letter, steadier this time, and sent it off with the next supply run. When the thaw came, the elk moved back up the ridge and the days smelled faintly of wet bark and earth. One clear morning, Weston brought in an armful of firewood and found Sahra standing in the doorway, her hands resting over her lower belly. He set the logs down without speaking. She looked at him with a smile that held no fear, only wonder. "I'm late," she said. He crossed to her, wrapped her in his arms, and they stood there a long time, the air bright around them, the snow melting into the ground outside. When spring fully broke, her sister came, bringing 3 noisy boys and a quiet, grateful heart. She saw the house, the fields, the man who didn't raise his voice. She saw the way Sahra moved through that space like she'd always belonged. "You look like her," Weston told her sister one night on the porch, "but she's stronger." "She always was," her sister said. The boys chased chickens until the sun set, and Sahra laughed in a way Weston had never heard, full and unguarded, like something too long kept quiet had finally been given permission to sing. In the summer, she gave birth to a daughter with her eyes and Weston's steady mouth. They named her Clara after the mother Sahra had lost. The house, once silent and still, filled with sound: a baby's cry, a hammer's ring, the rustle of mint picked fresh from the window box. And in the evenings, when the light stretched long across the valley, Weston would sit with Sahra on the porch, Clara asleep in her arms, and watch the wind move through the grass. He didn't speak often. He didn't need to. She leaned against him always. And the world, just as it was, felt full and finished.